Okay, so welcome everybody to this week's call to Health Talks 365 with Dr. Joseph Ahrens. My name is Jackie Boyle, and I have the pleasure each week and the honour to welcome you all to this call. And as we go forward, the great thing about how we have this format now, talking about flavonoids and the benefits of it, gives us the ability to stretch our knowledge into specific conditions. And today we are talking about skin conditions. And as I read down through some of them, we're not going to be able to touch on all of these, maybe one or two, but we're doing a basic overview today of skin conditions because there are so many, but there are different age factors. As I was talking to Dr. Ahrens about it yesterday when I was looking through it, there are children's skin conditions that are very predominant just for them. There are people that have got during pregnancy. There's so many things through there when we start looking at what the symptoms are, what the potential support system can be for being able to intervene there with things like eczema, psoriasis, acne, rosacea. We're looking at cellulitis, measles, lupus, fibromyalgia, dermatitis, alopecia, shingles. The list goes on. And when I was talking to you yesterday, Dr. Ahrens, what became very evident, we hear somebody that may say, I've got eczema, what can I do for this? I've got psoriasis, I've got acne. Well, we know that flavonoids are going to help because why? They're going to help address the symptoms of inflammation, and there is inflammation present in these. So prior to me handing this over to you, I do want to actually just request very kindly that we do not have this recorded by anybody else, a third party. We will provide this for you. Everything that you hear is Dr. Aaron's personal opinion, and we are not aiming to cure, heal, and or mitigate any conditions that we may talk about today. So with that, let's get into the topic of skin conditions, and let's bring our esteemed host on board. How are you, Dr. Ahrens?
I'm really good. Thank you very much. We're going to talk about skin, the largest organ on our body and in or out of our body. And, that's actually very critical for a person like me that I do live in the Bahamas, as most people know, and I'm under constant barrage of things that could cause a lot of issues for my skin. So, yeah, I'm really glad to be here. Thank you very much, Jackie.
So, Dr. Ahrens, before you start into this, I think people need to understand we are going to just do an overview, and potentially what we may do over the next couple of weeks is break this down into a few different areas. So if any of you have got specific questions, please put them into the chat because I will keep them on board so we can address specific areas for you as much as we possibly can. But today is an overview about the skin, and as you have just heard, it's like a Pandora's box that we're opening up today. So I'll hand it over to you, Dr. Ahrens.
Well, thank you very much. Yes, just like you said, we really need to start out with an overview. Even just describing the skin can take a couple of hours, and we're going to cram everything into a half an hour. I'll touch on just some high notes here. And really what I would like, as you just mentioned, to do is as we go through today and the next week or two, people to please send in the questions that they want specifically addressed. Always we take questions. We like to answer those, but the skin has a number of maladies and they don't just come for one or two things. Many things can affect the skin. A lot of things that are going on inside you affect the skin. So it's not a skin issue. It just shows itself up as a skin problem. And if you've got a good doctor, a good dermatologist in particular, they can tell you, hey, this is showing on the skin, but you've got another issue going on. We're also going to, after the description, we're going to address things that people I know are really interested in, and wrinkles and blemishes and all those discolorations and cellulite and all that stuff. We'll touch on that. And then we're also going to get into things like skin cancer. Again, we are not here to cure anything, but we're going to do a good description and tell you why this happens and why weren't we concerned about it 50 years ago and what's happening now. I'm also going to take a week to talk about things that people do for their skin, internal and external. So, you know, people take collagen, they take a lot of different supplements to help boost the health of their skin. Do those work? A few do, most don't. And I'm just laid on the line. This is what I want this format and this site and all of my Dr. Joe Ahrens things on Facebook and all to be. I want to just tell you the truth. And you know, it's not all about flavonoids. There's some things flavonoids don't do, but there's a lot of things they do. And then we're going to get into eventually, okay, what really works and what would be a good skin routine. And you know what? There's no magic here. Unfortunately, there's no cream that will just restore you to being 18 years old. And I mean, you can restore 5 or 10 years, but you're not going to have baby beautiful skin. But I'll tell you what the limitations are and where you can go. So that's going to take the next 2 or 3 weeks. I'm really looking forward to that. And make sure you do send in those questions so that I'll cover specifically what one person or another is particularly interested in. And also people that are listening to this on the recording, it's not too late. Once you go to the recording, put your comments in there and we'll get to them. Okay, let's talk about the skin. Yes, the largest organ in the body. And anybody can read this themselves. They can just Google skin and they get all these diagrams. And I'm going to go a little more than that. I'm going to just do the common sense analysis of skin. So you got skin on top of you, and the outside layer is the epidermis. And you know, we talk about epi means out, and meso is middle, and hypo is below that. So those are the 3 main layers: the outside layer, the epidermis, and then there's the part underneath that, the dermis itself, and then there is the hypodermis. Those are the 3 things. Now, if you were to peel those off of you, you'd see fat and muscle. And I think some of us have seen that one time or another, especially if you have kids that come in, you know, they fell off the skateboard or whatever, and they stripped all that stuff away. And it's remarkable that your body can regenerate itself. And we're going to go into that too. Part of your immune and inflammatory system. And so that's another reason that you should have flavonoids, because we know, I've pounded into you guys, flavonoids really about supporting your immune system. And your immune system is not just for bee stings and cuts and viruses and bacteria. It's your healing system. That's the first step. And the first step is inflammation. And because it's inflamed, it looks like it was on fire. Actually, the previous medical people and scientists thought there was a fire underneath your skin. They actually thought that it was red, it got hot. And here you're going to find out why. So the epidermis itself is actually not very thick in most places. Really small, like less than a 1/10 of a millimeter. Now, how big is a millimeter? You can actually see on most scales that you've got millimeter. It's just like the thickness of one of your small fingernail. The thickness of your little fingernail is about a millimeter. Okay, that's a really good example. Now your thumb is 2 or 3 times thicker than that, but most people, the thickness of their little pinky nail is a millimeter. And the epidermis runs from almost non-existent, like a 1/10 or less of that, on your eyelids. This is where the thinnest epidermis is, right there on your eyelids. And why? Because it's almost never damaged. Most of the time when your eyes are open, that rolls back into underneath your socket and it's not exposed to anything. So it can be real thin. It's no problem. But then you get on your elbow and the palms of your hand where you've got a lot of wear, it gets thicker. But still, it's no more than 1 millimeter. That's the thickness of your little nail. Okay, you got that? Well, in that layer, there are 5 distinct layers underneath that. In that little bit that's as thick as your nail, there are 5 layers, and they each have a function. And the first one on the outside is composed of mostly keratin, which is the same stuff that is in your hair, not mine. I don't have any keratin up here. But the hair, I got a little right there. The hair is made out of keratin. It's a protein that is structural. It's not like the protein that we eat. Keratin, well, that is the first layer, and it's like a tenth of a millimeter, and its purpose is protection. And its skin is extremely strong for what it is, as thin as it is. And then underneath that, we have a layer that serves as a waterproofing, another layer, a waterproofing. And then underneath that, we get into the basal layers, B-A-S-A-L. It actually does mean base. And then underneath that, we have 2 other layers that are mostly support the top. At the very bottom, the 5th layer, right before you get into what we call the dermis, the so-called real skin, this layer is rejuvenated every 2 weeks. Well, it doesn't like go 2 weeks and then grow, go 2 weeks and grow, but it's on a cycle, and every 2 weeks, every hour, every minute, it's growing, and it takes around 2 weeks for it matures, and then it works its way up to the top layer, and that takes a month. So your skin completely rejuvenates in a month. It takes 2 weeks for it to go from juvenile to a mature stage, but then it takes a month to go from that basal level to the top. And you've seen that yourself. You've cut yourself or you've got a burn. And by the way, that is what you're getting rid of. If you have a burn and you get a blister and it pops, that is the epidermis. Now, it is often thicker than a 1 millimeter, especially on the heel of your hand and elbows. It can be quite thick. And if you get on your feet and you've got calluses on your feet, it can be quite thick, like 5 millimeters. But in general, like on the skin of your forearm and your forehead, it ranges around 1.5 millimeter. And these 5 layers are within that thickness, the thickness of your little fingernail. Now, this is where most cancers start. If we're talking about just skin cancer, we're not talking about cancer that started in your lung or somewhere and then migrated throughout your body, but the ones that start in your skin start in that first 1 to 1.5 millimeter at the basal, B-A-S-A-L layer. This is where the new cells turn into specialized cells, the basal, B-A-S-A-L. Again, why they call it base. And that's where, when you get UV damage, it affects the generation of the cells, and the UV damage, ultraviolet light from the sun, it causes your DNA in those cells, because every cell has DNA, and this is where your cells are being produced, the bottom of those 5 layers. And they're normally making normal skin cells. You get UV light that can travel through the top 4 and hit that 5th, and they can train wreck. It's a really good analogy. You got 2 in your DNA, you got 2 parallel tracks, and they're making new proteins, and they end up making new cells. Well, the UV can come in there and actually cause those railroad tracks to cross. That's where cancer comes from. You got a DNA, which is 2 parallel train track rails, and usually it's just making eventually proteins from the RNA. That's a complicated process, but it makes parts for your body. But that UV damage can just switch those rails, and you end up with something that is foreign to your own body, and it starts making cancer cells instead of good, healthy cells. But for most people, it's really not important, because your body has machinery to clean that up. Your body is so remarkable. So even though it's in itself, it's like 98% perfect, when you get those aberrations, those 2% where you got UV light coming in, it can also come from chemicals from the outside, any type of, remember, an insult. You can get a cross on those rails, and then you make cells that are cancerous. And that's usually not good. Then you've got your machinery that comes along and takes care of that and gets rid of the trash, so to speak, and gets the uncrossed, and your life continues, and those cells work their way up through the 5, 4, 3, 2, 1 layer. That takes 1 month. So 2 weeks, more or less, for the brand new cells to mature and become a functioning cell. And then a whole month from there to go from layer 5, 4, 3, 2, 1 to the outside. And they change as they go through those layers. So the cells that are on the bottom, they're the new baby cells, and then they move into the structure cells, and then they turn into cells that are waterproofing, and then they turn in eventually to the cell on the outside, which is the resistant part. This is the forces. It's really tough. You know, actually, how many times have you thought you cut yourself? Sometimes you do. You're cutting things, and boom, oh man! But how many times have you done that? You thought sure you cut yourself, and there was no cut there. Your skin is remarkable, flexible, and it can keep, and that's the primary purpose of the outside layer, is to protect you from the environment. Then the underlying layer there, we're just talking now about the epidermis, the underlying layers are to keep the moisture there and to prevent you from losing too much water. And then underneath that is your structure. And then the bottom, the 5th layer down there, is where everything's happening. So you go into your dermatologist, and listen, I'm telling you, if you're 50, 60, 70 years old, even younger, you need to go see your dermatologist. Don't just go to your general practitioner or your family practitioner. I encourage everyone to go to a dermatologist as you get older, because you know that these processes, as we'll talk about soon here, they don't work as well when you get older. That 1 month gets longer, and it takes longer to produce cells, and you still got the same damage coming down, but your body does not make the cells as rapidly and as robust as they used to. That 2nd and 3rd layer in there, which is meant to trap the moisture and regulate moisture, it doesn't make a good covering as much as it used to. This is why it's more important that you use things like moisturizers as you get older. You know, when I was 20 years old, I thought it was stupid to put any moisturizer. You know, men don't put moisturizer on their skin. What the heck? But I'll tell you what, I do it now after having been with my current dermatologist for these years, and I understand it. I use myself a moisturizer, but it is absolutely unscented. I don't want to hear any comments on that, but it's a moisturizer, and you need that because that moisturizer barrier is not as good as it used to be. So that's one of the points I did want to make in this one, is that's where the UV damage occurs. And that's where most of the cancer, not all, we'll talk about other cancers, but that's where most of the common cancers are. And your doctor, your dermatologist might say, well, you have basal cell carcinoma. That means that bottom 5th layer where it's making new cells, it went haywire and it started making cancerous cells. And if you don't take care of it, they will become the predominant part of your skin. That's the issue. It's not that cancer cells eat you up. It's that they replace your good functioning skin. And it's like lung cancer. Lung cancer it's not like they eat you up like a Pac-Man. People have this concept wrong. It's that cancer cells replace your good functioning tissue. And so if your dermatologist finds it, like on my scalp, you know, everybody knows I'm bald here. Not quite as a billiard ball, but pretty bald. I'm always getting little starts of cancer on my head, even though I take very good care. I try to have a hat on when I go outside. But I will get little spots where these basal cells, carcinomas, started making cells that don't belong there. And so that's when they just give a little shot of nitrogen or something to whack that off. And it's usually so routine, you don't even think of it. But sometimes they start growing downward and they get into subbasal cell carcinoma. And that's where the danger is. That's where the big danger is. So you've got to get taken care of. Don't just say you're healthy. Please, people, at least sometime go see a dermatologist. I go every 6 months. I'm not ashamed to say every 6 months. I'm not going to take any chances, especially when I live down here in the tropics. That's closer to the equator, where the sun is just pummeling you all the time here. The intensity of the UV rays are sometimes astronomical. You know, I even have a little weather station here, and if anybody wants to know where I am, you can go on Weather Underground and find the only Weather Underground station on Andros Island, and that will be at my home. And that little unit, and it tells you it's raining and, you know, and all that stuff, what's the temperature, etc. But that little unit also has a UV gauge on it. And man, today it was at 8, and that's dangerous. So 1 to 2, 3 is just no, don't worry about it. 3, 4, and 5, oh, it's moderate. You probably should put a hat on. Get over 6, and this is when you're going to get cooked. And the scale goes up to 11, by the way, not 10. But and over that, I mean, without any protection, in 10 minutes, you actually can get cancer. I mean, it's that.
Ahrens, I just want to pause you on that because I'm sure most of us are over 16 or 18 on this call, I believe, from what I'm seeing. You know, most of us don't really, well, we are more aware, I think, of, you know, looking at sun cancers and what the end result can be for us. But for most of us, I think, as we understand, and I am one of those people, and I'm sure others are like it too, it's what we're doing when we're younger. And we were not as aware of what we are now, that we're making sure we use slip, slop, slap, as we say here in Australia, like put on the sunscreen, put a hat on, and so forth. Whereas when we were younger, the damage has already been done. You know, I used to fry myself, as I'm sure many others did too, probably. Maybe they didn't, but I did. Out there with barely nothing on and didn't worry about a hat, didn't worry about sunscreen, was out riding horses. I didn't care. The browner I was, the happier I was. But my skin has been affected as I've aged, and these sun cancers have been, something has changed, or genetics, whatever it may be that's in there for the individual. I've had little sun cancers. I've had ones that have had to be surgically removed. I have grown inward. So they're things that, as we age, sometimes the damage has already been done through the exposure that we had as a child. Is that correct?
Yes, but it's not the cancer issue. Definitely, when you were young, you did damage to your skin
I'm still
that
young too, just quietly.
when other people were young, they there was damage done and that damaged the machinery in their skin, and that will be like the waterproofing layer, the the basal cell production that can get damaged, and then they're also we're going to go into the dermis where the oils are produced. That can be damaged when you're young, and you are too bad. You know, it's just like hearing. You know, when kids go to concerts, or for me, I used to work in a very high, noisy factory environment. Plus, I went out and shot all these guns. I like to hunt birds and stuff, and it damaged my ears permanently, and there's no hope. Even with if I were to use hearing aids, I can't get back. And that's how your skin is too. You cannot get back some of these things. You can kind of supplement yourself with lotions, for instance, because your body is no longer producing enough oil. You can do those things. But and the damage is done. However, the cancer part is a day-to-day issue. Because you got UV exposure when you were much younger, that doesn't affect now the cancer you have now. Cancer is a ongoing, constant thing, and if you even if you had it when you're younger, it doesn't make you more prevalent when you're older. So the cancer is now. And yes, all those previous things could have damaged your skin's ability to rejuvenate itself and to provide itself with moisture and oil. So there's two different things there.
So
So I want to go
I
ahead.
just I just need to keep us on time, Dr. Ahrens, because I know you've requested this of me because it was always going to be a huge, big topic. But I've got a couple of questions here that I need you to answer briefly for me, and then if we can direct this, because I know we're going to have to do part or phase one,
Yeah.
two, 3 to 4 with this because it's such a huge topic. But
So yeah, I agree with you 100%. I just want to give a description of the dermis, and we'll close out this session. And so you have those 5 layers in the epidermis, and the fifth layer is the most, well, they're all important, but that's where all the damage happens. Go to a dermatologist. And then underneath that is the dermis, and it's divided into 2 layers, and it's actually thicker than the epidermis, but 2 layers there. And this is where most of your blood vessels are, it's where your nerves are, the hair follicle, the root of the hair follicle is there, little muscles attached to the hair follicle. And its main purpose is structure, and it has a fatty layer also on the bottom of it. So it's primarily structure, and it has, of course, it helps also if you got a cut or something, but that's mostly that epidermis. It's also only a couple of millimeters thick. And then underneath that is the hypodermis. That is mostly fat tissue. And I go back to the dermis. That's the source. Its breakdown is the source of where you get, unfortunately, the wrinkles. And the top layer of the dermis is also where the pigmentation happens. So, and that's what most people are concerned about, really, is, well, they're concerned about skin cancer, but the dermis, when look, I got all these wisdom spiders here, that's the dermis that's happened. That's where elastin is. That's where the collagen is. And so we'll talk in future about what you can do about that. And then the hypodermis is mostly fat tissue and some other structural keratin. Below that is fat and muscle. So those 3 areas, let's go over that and we'll close. Epidermis is 5 layers. The only ones really that most people should be concerned about is that outer one, which is your biggest protection. And then down there in that 5th one is where the UV can damage your basal cells and turn into cancer. Underneath that, the dermis, there's 2 layers in that. We're going to spend one of these talks just on the dermis. That's where your wrinkles come from. That's where the elastic, it's the same word. That's where you get the flexibility. That's where the collagen is. And then underneath that is the hypodermis. And that's why we call hypodermic needles, because when you get a shot, it goes down into that hypodermic, not into the muscle, right into the hypodermic. So that whole thing is just a few millimeters. In certain parts of your body, it can be up to a centimeter, and you've seen that when you ever on your heel, you get a blister from your shoe and you look down there and that blister is like, 10 millimeters thick. Yeah, that's where it is. But then all the way to your eyelid where it's almost non-existent. So Jackie, I really want to close here. And I encourage people, send in their questions. We're going to talk about this for the next 2 or 3 weeks. What do you want us to cover? I think I will cover most people's questions, but and give the answers they want. But make sure they send those in so that we'll be sure and cover everything.
Thanks, Dr. Ahrens. And I think there's been a couple of questions in here, and I think you have covered them in regards to what to put on your skin for sun cancers and things. Well, Dr. Ahrens is not your personal physician. Please go and speak to a dermatologist. There are plenty of options out there for you, but yeah, and looking at, I think breaking it down into specific 2 or 3 different skin conditions that are very common, unfortunately, which are things like eczema and psoriasis and acne. I know there was a question about acne, which we can address as well as we go forward. And then bring Dr. Ron Borsima Sr. into this equation too, because we are what we eat. And I've so often heard you say this, Dr. Ahrens, and I've heard Dr. Ron, who has been really great for us and has stepped in and hosted this call for us at times as well. that he's a huge believer. He's a very good friend of both of us as well. You've got to think of yourself as a tree, I believe, Dr. Ahrens, that it is the roots. The roots being at a cellular level, our blood, our muscles, our bones, our gut. It all starts in our gut. What we put in our mouth, what we choose to nurture our body with, is going to be a reflection of what we see on our skin in most cases. So if you want to eat rubbish all day long, you're probably going to end up having pretty poor skin. You're going to have stretched skin because you're going to be overweight. You're going to have all of these issues that happen for you. So this is where we can talk as we go forward, I feel, Dr. Ahrens and Dr. Ron. We are what we eat. And then, of course, we've got these, I'm going to say it, these amazing flavonoids that have been life-changing for so many of us, to be able to bring those in to support our body in the largest organ that we have, which is our skin. But it starts by what you stick in your mouth. So you need to be fueling your body with the ultimate choices that you possibly can, because your skin will reflect it. And just the last thing, how many of us have heard when somebody is pregnant, oh my goodness, you are glowing? That's another topic all within itself, because it is something that comes into the hormonal levels and so forth as well. So, there's so many areas. Please stay with us. I want to thank each and every one of you for always turning up, because it would be a very lonely call without you. Please send me a message for anything that you want to cover, but we will break it down into phase 1 through to 4, I believe, because I think we've got enough areas here in this topic to do that. And Dr. Ahrens, I want to just hand it back to you. Is there anything lastly that you would like to make a comment on before we finish?
Well, in the next couple of weeks, we'll go through this and those 3 different layers I told you about. Next week, we're going to focus on the epidermis. And so that is a place to talk about sunscreens as an example, and what you can do, you should do or should not. And we'll also talk about, vitamin D manufacture. How does that sunscreens affect that? And then after that, the next week we'll go into the dermis, which is in there. We'll talk about things such as acne, etc. So next week we'll be talking about the UV damage and the epidermis.
Sounds like a plan, because I know I want to be Mrs. Benjamin Button. So I don't know if you've seen that movie. I want to anti-age backwards. And I know with your flavonoids, Dr. Ahrens, it's helping me do that. Dr. Ron Bossema as well, look at you. Oh my goodness. But again, people, we are what we eat. So this is an education platform. We hope you've got something from this. I know each time that I listen to you, Dr. Ahrens, I learn something. It's not what you say, it's what I hear. It's not what you show me, it's what I see. And it's just that repetitive knowledge that we keep on being drilled into us, that all of a sudden, for some people, the penny drops, boom, straight away. But we need reminders. We're human beings. So I want to thank you so much for everything you bring to the table. And again, thank you, each and every one of you. And we look forward to seeing you next week. So bye for now.